Hello, this is Alyssa Tong. I'm Events Marketing Manager for CloudBees. I will be hosting the webinar today. This is a webinar on Jenkins authentication and authorization, which will focus on the flexibility and power of role-based access control plugin. Our presenter for today is Jesse Glick. Jesse is one of the first committers to the Jenkins project and is currently working as developer and architect for CloudBees. And you can also contact Jesse via info@cloudbees.com. Due to the overwhelming interest for this topic, we have pre-recorded today's presentation so that we are able to offer you live Q&A throughout the presentation. With that said, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please post them in the Q&A window. Jesse will answer them live in the text panels. Today's webinar will be recorded. We'll send out the recording to everyone who's registered. So with that, we hope you will find this webinar useful for understanding and implementing role-based access control. I'll go ahead and roll the presentation.
Talk today about
Hi, sorry for the poor resolution. We're going to go ahead and switch to a live webinar right now. So I'm going to switch the presenter to Jesse, and he'll take you through the presentation. Thanks.
All right, is everyone able to hear my audio now?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, let me switch to a browser screen, and we'll see if everyone is able to see that. You should see a Jenkins screen taking up the space.
Yep, I can.
Excellent. Okay, sorry about that, people. It seems that the video recording just gets played back at a YouTube resolution or something like that. We didn't realize it would be totally unreadable in that context, so we'll try to do a similar presentation via direct screen share instead. So I think we were on the Configure Global Security page before. So what you probably had difficulty seeing was that I've configured a mock security realm here. And we have a list of 4 different users I'm going to use to demonstrate different features: Alice, Bob, Charlie, and Debbie. And next to each of them, I have an external group name, which we'll make use of extensively. So what we're going to do, so if you're not using Jenkins Enterprise, then you'd be limited to the first few authorization strategies here. So matrix-based security or project-based matrix authorization strategy. And you can see here a list of permissions, and you can define different people and give them permissions to various objects. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on role-based access security. So this is the Jenkins Enterprise feature that gives a richer authorization scheme. If you click the little help button, you can see a description of it. And as soon as I save to enable role-based access control, or RBAC, the default configuration is going to require a login in order to do anything. So I'm going to just log in as Alice. Alice is going to be our administrator for this purpose. So the first thing I just want to show is that now groups and roles links have appeared in the Jenkins sidebar. And in the initial configuration, you can see that we have 2 predefined roles. This little green icon means what's called a system role. So this is something that's built into the plugin. And we have one role which is called anonymous. So this represents permissions that are given to anyone without even having to log in. And you can see that by default, the plugin is configured to not give any such permissions. So you have to log in order to use Jenkins at all. And we have an authenticated role, which represents permissions that are available to anyone who's logged in, no matter who that is. So currently, we have all permissions as an initial setup are granted to all logged in users. So that's what we're going to change. Throughout, I'll be using this Who Am I link, which will appear in various places. If you're using a somewhat older version of the RBAC plugin, you'll need to upgrade, I think, to 3.8 in order to see this link. And the Who Am I link is going to give you information about the currently logged in user and what groups they're a member of and what kinds of roles they have access to. So we'll get back to that. So let's go to roles, and if we click on Manage, then this is where we're able to define new roles and change the permissions associated with existing roles. So what I'm going to want to do is add a role called Administer. And I'm going to, for this role, I'm going to grant the overall administer permission. So you can see from the tooltip that this gives basically all permissions within Jenkins. I click on it, you'll notice that all of these other checkboxes in the same row just gray out. And that's because the administer permission implies all of those others, so you don't actually need to explicitly grant any of them. You can also use these buttons to clear or check all of the checkboxes in a row, so that's handy. So I'm going to try turning off all permissions for authenticated users. That will have to grant them explicit permissions. And I try save, and we actually get an error in this case because the plugin has noticed a possible lockout condition. In the initial configuration, there are no groups, and this means that the administrator role is not actually granted to anybody. It's just sitting there unused. And so if I tried to turn off administrator permission for authenticated users, then there would be no one left to configure Jenkins further. So that's not possible. So to start off with, we'll just leave the administrator permission granted for the authenticated role. Now we can save that. So what we're going to need to do is go to the groups link, and we're going to create a new group. So here you get to choose any kind of group name that you want that makes sense within Jenkins. So I'm going to call this initial group administrators, or actually I'll call it sysadmins, let's say. So this is anyone with system administration permission on Jenkins. And I'm going to grant these people the administrator role. So now you see that all of these permissions are associated with the administrator role show up. And now I'm going to say add user group. So initially it's empty. I want to add some people to it. I could add myself directly as Alice, but instead what I'm going to do is enter sudo. And if you look at the icon, you can see that this is an external group. So this is a group that was defined outside of Jenkins. In my demo, I'm just using the mock security realm, so it's not really. But normally this would be something like an LDAP group or an Active Directory group or an entry in Unix etc group or something like that. So now what I can do is go back to roles, and now I should be able to turn off permissions for the authenticated role. So you can see that I can save that now, and only the administrator role has any permissions. This works because as Alice, I'm in the sudo external group, and that makes me a part of the Jenkins sysadmins group, and that group is granted the administrator role. So that's what we want. So now we've been able to turn off permissions for other users by default. So now I'm going to go back and actually I'm going to grant some permissions for authenticated users, just not general administration permissions. So I'm going to choose overall read, job discover. So we'll just click off a few basic read type permissions in here. So job read and job discover. There we go. And view read and role view will also add in. So this gives you the ability to see different views or top tabs in Jenkins. And role view, you normally, in a real production system, you probably wouldn't turn this on, but it's useful for demo purposes. So role view is going to let anyone who's logged in see that roles list and who am I. So that's good for demonstrating why things are working or why things are blocked. So now we have this reduced set of permissions for the authenticated role. Okay, so we can try this out, for example, by logging in as another user as Bob. And so now you can see that Bob can see Jenkins, but he has no general permission to administer it or create new jobs or build anything, whatever. You can double check that in the who am I list for Bob. He's authenticated and he's in this external group, but since he's not a member of any Jenkins groups, he only gets the default authenticated role. So let's let's go and add some more interesting roles, not just administer. So we'll go back to being Alice and manage our list of roles. I'm going to add one called develop. So for the develop role, I'm going to grant most of the job permissions here. I'm going to exclude delete and move. So we'll grant create, configure, read, discover, build, workspace, not move. So we'll leave it at that. And then run view SCM and skip categories. I'm going to grant everything. So you can manipulate builds, you can do things with view tabs, you can make tags, and over in the skip section, this is a Jenkins Enterprise feature to temporarily skip builds. We'll let developers do that. So we'll save that. So you see a list of roles here, of permissions for that role here. So let's make a new group called developers. So we'll go to groups, new group, developers. Grant them the developer role, of course. And when we add members to it, we'll add the dev external group. So there are a few people. So there's, I think, one person in this group. We're also going to make another, go back to groups and make a third group called testers, which we'll be using later. Right now, we're not going to grant it any roles. This will basically be a placeholder for being added to other groups, which we'll see later. And we'll just add the QA external group to that. So now let's go see what we can do when we're logged in as Charlie. So Charlie has the dev external group, so he's in the developers group, so he gets the develop role. So that means that there's no ability for Charlie to manage Jenkins overall, but he does have the ability to run builds and configure jobs and do things like that. So for example, you can create new jobs here. That's permitted for Charlie. Now let's take a look at some of the more sort of the core feature of the RBAC plugin, which is the ability to assign different permissions to different objects. So far we've only been dealing with the subject and the verb parts of authorization sentences in Jenkins. So we're saying what subjects, what users are given what permissions, what verbs. But now we want to pay attention to the objects. So previously we've just been saying, you can have this permission throughout anything in Jenkins, but now we want to make that more specific. So when we're on a particular job, here's a job called public, you can click on the roles group again, and you'll see roles you'll see how roles are applied to this job in particular. So we still have the names of roles, but here you'll see that the groups we've defined globally in Jenkins are now italicized, and that means that these groups are being inherited onto this job. And similarly, in the Who Am I list, you can see that the develop role is being propagated, so it's coming in from Jenkins, the whole Jenkins installation. It's not specific to this job. So we're going to change that. We're going to do something specifically for this job. So first I'm going to log in as Alice, who has permissions to do this kinds of thing. So let's log out as Charlie, log in as Alice, go to public, and we're going to create a group in the public job. We'll call it public testers. So we have a group. This is a group that's specific to one job, and we'll grant them the develop role. And then we're going to add testers. This is a Jenkins group defined at Jenkins top level. So I'm sort of have this top level group that I'm using only for the purpose of being a placeholder. It has no permissions at top level, but I can use it as a shortcut for adding whole sets of people to particular jobs or something like that. So if you look at the roles list for the public job, now you can see that the local group public testers is bold-faced, so that gives you an indication that's defined specifically on this job. So that's all you need to do. Just one note about the names of groups. You should try to avoid having name clashes between groups at different levels if you can. In case of a conflict, a particular name in a membership list for a group is interpreted first as a local group, then as a global group, and finally as an external group. But to avoid confusion, it's good to try to create distinct group names. So let's go log out. Log in as Debbie and see what Debbie's roles are here. So Debbie is part of the QA group externally. So that means that she's part of the Jenkins global group called testers. And that means in turn that she's part of the public testers group specifically on the public job. So she gets develop permission on this public job. So what this means is that Debbie can configure this job and build it and do all of those things. But she doesn't have any such permissions at top level, so she has no new item link to create new jobs at top level or anything like that. You can see that if you go to who am I at top level, she's in the global testers group, but she doesn't get any permissions as a result. So that's how we've localized permissions to this particular job. So you could do this over and over for each job, but this would get pretty tedious if you had hundreds of jobs, all of which had a really similar configuration. So in Jenkins Enterprise, we take advantage of a feature called folders, which lets you group together related jobs into a hierarchy, and you can apply permissions at any point in the hierarchy. So let's go back to being Alice, and we'll show how to create a folder. So you go to the new job link, and we select the job type folder. I'm going to call it this folder NextGen. I'm going to pretend that this is a folder containing several projects for the next generation of some software tool. So we'll do that. And then within this folder, we have the new item link so that you can create jobs inside of the folder. So I'll create a job called base. It's just a freestyle project. You can see from the Jenkins crumb bar that we have Jenkins top level, and then we have a NextGen folder, and then a base job within the folder. So now what we can do is, from NextGen, we can define groups on NextGen, and so that will apply to this folder and everything inside of it. So let's create a group called NextGen Team Lead. And we're going to grant administer permission to it. And we're going to add an external group called lead to this group. So now let's see what happens when we log in as Bob. So Bob has no overall administer permission, so there's no manage Jenkins link here. But within the NextGen folder, Bob is king. So Bob can make new projects and build things and do everything that he wants to. So for example, Bob can use a new item link and create a new project for add-ons to the software within this folder. You can see Bob's roles here. because he's part of NextGen team lead, he's getting the administer permission just on this folder though. So let's move on to another interesting feature of the RBAC plugin, which is that you can not only add permissions to particular folders, but you can also remove them. So you can have permissions that are defined by default at a higher level, but that are not available within a particular job or within a particular folder. This is called filtering. So I'm going to stay logged in as Bob. And on the NextGen folder, I'm going to find a new group, which I'm going to call NextGen Developers. I'm going to grant that the develop permission. And I'm going to add an individual user. So this is the first time we've added a single user. You can do that instead of a group. So we're going to add Debbie to this group. And now if we go to the roles for NextGen, you'll notice that because we're in an item underneath top level, this link filter appears here. So if you click the filter link, then you're able to filter out roles that would otherwise be inherited from Jenkins top level. So what we're going to do is we're going to click require explicit assignment next to the developer role. So this means that within the NextGen folder, in order to have the developer role, you have to have been granted that role by a group specifically in this folder, not just because you generally have develop permission in Jenkins. So let's apply that. So you'll notice that the top level developers group has disappeared from this develop row in the roles list. So if we can test this out with Charlie. So Charlie has overall develop permission, so he can say create new jobs, he can build the public project, and so on. But within the NextGen folder, you'll see that Charlie has no ability to create new jobs or build or configure any of the jobs that are already in NextGen folder. All he can do is look at them. You can confirm that with the Who Am I link here. He has no special permissions on this folder, just the generic authenticated permissions. So what if you don't want Charlie to even be able to see this folder at all? So we've shown that because Charlie is authenticated, then he can at least look at the folder. But maybe we don't actually want that. We want to have a totally secret project that's private for some reason. So we can do that. We just have to go back to being Bob and go to roles of NextGen and filter. And we're going to filter out the authenticated role. So let's apply it. So now, by default, nobody in NextGen has this authenticated role. So if we try this out and we go back to being Charlie, you can see that from Charlie's perspective, the NextGen folder has simply disappeared. And even if Charlie remembered the URL or got a URL in email or something like that, if he goes to it, Jenkins is just going to give a 404 as if there's no such folder at all. He can't even tell that it exists. So that's probably what we wanted. A little side note, which I'll log in as Alice to show you. If you go to description of permissions, you'll see that under read there are two different permissions, read and discover, for jobs. So discover is the weaker permission. That just allows you to tell that a job of a given name exists. So if you have discover but not read, and you try to jump to the URL like Bob did in this case, or as Charlie did in this case, then instead of getting a 404, you'll just get a message saying, oops, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to look at that job. Or if you might be allowed to look at it if you were logged in, but you're currently logged out, then it will give you a login link. So let's see perhaps Bob can go just one further step. And on the next-gen roles, let's say Bob tries to filter out even the administrator role from Jenkins overall. So here, only people in the next-gen team lead group have the administrator role on this folder. So this would mean that if we log in as Alice, who's supposed to be the system administrator, suddenly this folder is hidden from Alice as well. So it's so secret that even Alice can't see it. But that doesn't make a lot of sense, because you would guess that a Jenkins administrator is able to do things like log into the shell account where the Jenkins server is running and get access to all of the data that way. So it doesn't really make sense to lock Alice out of anything. This was really just a mistake. So Alice can actually prevent that from happening. All she has to do is uncheck the filterable role next to administer. And so by default, roles are filterable, meaning that it's possible to filter them out, but we don't really want to do that for the administer role. So we're going to save that, and now if we go back up to top level, we'll see that the next-gen folder reappears. And in fact, if we're Bob and we go to the next-gen folder and we go to try to filter out some roles, that the administrator role is not even listed as an option for something you can filter out anymore. So it's been totally blocked by Alice. All right, I'm going to talk about a somewhat more advanced feature of RBAC, which is called pinning. So normally, in all of the examples we've seen, if you grant some permission to a group on a folder, then that permission also applies to anything inside the folder, any jobs inside of it. But in fact, you can turn that off. You can have something that's granted only directly on objects, but not on its children. So we'll see how to do this. Let's become Alice and go into roles. And we're going to create a role called Notice. And we'll grant it overall read, our usual job read and discover. View read. It's also generally useful. Role read. We'll also grant group view as well. So just a few different kinds of read permissions for the notice role. Yeah, now if we go to the next-gen folder, I'm going to create a group corresponding to this, and may call it next-gen notified. And we'll grant it the notice permission. But now I'm going to turn off the propagates checkbox. So what this means is that I'm going to grant this notice permission only to the folder itself, not to any of the children. And so you'll see that we now have a little pin and a hat, meaning that the role is pinned to this folder but not inherited. You can take a look at that, and in the roles list for the folder, you can see that the next-gen notified group gets this role, but this column has roles in the children of next-gen, has nothing in it, so it's not propagated. So let's go to this group, sorry, to the group, not to the role, next-gen notified. And I'll just add a member dev, the external group. Now we'll try logging in as Charlie. So now Charlie goes to the next-gen folder. He can see that the folder exists. He can sort of look at it, but it appears to Charlie that there are no jobs within it. So he's only able to see that the folder is here, but not, he doesn't have read permission on any of the jobs in it. So as far as Charlie is concerned, this folder appears to be empty. So that's a quick example of pinning. One other thing that I'd like to talk about, which is not a separate feature of the plugin, but sort of a consequence of the way the RBAC is designed and the way that particular permissions work, is that you can have users administer their own groups. You can basically delegate authority. And the reason you would want to do this is because Alice by now is getting pretty tired, so she's been making all of these configuration changes. And in a rapidly expanding team, you wouldn't want to have to constantly be pestering Alice to make every kind of permission change in the whole system. Really what you'd like to do is to have Alice set out some broad rules, create some folders for particular teams, and then tell those teams to basically take care of themselves. So we're going to show how to do that. Alice has to do some preparatory work, of course. So let's create a rule called sign up. So I'm going to grant 3 permissions here. Role view as usual. Group view as well. Now I'm going to add in group manage for this role. So group manage, you can see from the tooltip, it says add or remove members or edit the description of the group. So this lets you change the membership of the group. I am not granting this role the configure permission because that permission is much stronger. It allows the person who holds it to actually change which permissions are granted, or which roles are granted to this group, and I don't want to do that. So we have this limited sign-up permission. So now I'm going to go and make a new folder to demonstrate how this stuff works. I'm going to call it Playpen. So this is going to be a folder where people can experiment with different projects freely. I'm going to define a group in this folder called Play People. And I'm going to grant both the develop and the sign up roles to this group. By the way, if you have multiple roles assigned to a single group, then the actual permissions are additive. So you can see that people in this group are going to get all of the usual develop permissions, and then they're also going to get the special group manage permission from the sign up role. So initially, I'm just going to add the global developers group to this group. Okay. So let's log in as Charlie, and we'll see what Charlie can do. So inside the Playpen folder, Charlie has almost full permission, so he can create new jobs and do things like that. If you go to groups and you go to the Play People group, as Charlie, you can see that Charlie does not have the option to change the roles assigned to this group. So it's fixed at the develop and sign up roles, but Charlie can add people to this group. So we can add Debbie to it. And so Charlie can still create new projects and things like that. But if we log out and we log in as Debbie, so Debbie not only has usual develop permission, but Debbie also can make further changes to the Play People group. So basically, Alice has sort of offloaded all of the responsibility for managing this entire Playpen folder to people in the Play People group so that they can add new team members as they come on board to this group without having to go and make any kind of global configuration change. So that's very handy. One thing I want to talk about while we still have a bit of time is to make sure people understand the difference between containership and non-containership. So when I've been talking about assigning a group to a folder, that means that that group applies to all of the jobs in the folder. Jenkins also lets you define views, either at top level or inside a folder, which are just different presentations of the same list of jobs. It can have a subset of jobs. It can show different kinds of displays like dashboard and build pipeline and so on. You can apply permissions to views. You can even define groups local to a view. But it's important to know that those permissions only apply to the view itself, not to the jobs within them. The jobs are only contained inside Jenkins or at top level. So, for example, if I am logged in as Alice, I click the plus, and I can create a new view. Call it my view or something. Let's just create a simple list view here. You can add a couple of jobs to it, something like that. You can change the position of columns according to the kind of view. You can make various kinds of customizations like this. So now this shows up. But if you define a group on this view, let's say my view editors, something like that, and maybe you just give them all permissions. This is only going to let people do things like click edit the view and so on. It has no effect on the permissions of the public job or the next-gen folder. So, for example, if we log out and log in as Debbie, from my view, so from my view, well, actually, I didn't add any members to this group, so Debbie isn't currently in this. But if I were to add Debbie to the group on this, that wouldn't give her any special abilities like building public or anything like that. So a similar consideration applies to the list of computers. So if you click on build executor status here, this is also the same as, let's go in as Alice to show this better. Go to manage Jenkins, manage nodes. You can assign different permissions to computers or different slaves, but these permissions don't have anything to do with jobs that happen to be built on them. So in particular, you might be confused by a permission which is job build. So this is the ability to start a new build. This permission is only checked on the job itself. It's not checked on the computer. So you can't use RBAC to prevent people from starting jobs on particular nodes. In Jenkins Enterprise, there is a special plugin called Folders Plus, which exists for this purpose, for restricting which jobs can be built on a particular node. I don't think we have time to demo that now, but essentially if you, just really briefly, if you were to go into the next-gen folder and click on controlled slaves, then you would get the option to tie a particular slave to this folder, and that would mean that only jobs that are actually within this folder could be scheduled onto that slave. So this would be handy if you have build machines which are either too expensive for everyone to use or have various kinds of secret information stored in their file system or something like that. So I think that's it for the basic demo. We can open this up for Q&A if people have any. I was not able to see the Q&A window so far during the live demo, so I can take a moment to browse through and see if people had some questions I can take care of.
So Jesse, before we go to the Q&A, can I just cover some additional resources that I like to share?
Sure.
I'll switch the presenter over to me.
Sure.
So like I mentioned before we go to Q&A, we have additional resources should you like to learn more about Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees. For one, you may contact either Jesse or any of our Jenkins experts via info@cloudbees.com. There's also a wealth of information on cloudbees.com website about Jenkins. So we have data sheets, we've got training, lots of plugin information. There's also a free Jenkins Enterprise download. It's all free, so check it out. And the last item is we have a Jenkins user conference coming up on October 23rd. This information is also on our website at cloudbees.com, so I hope everybody can join us at the conference. So we'll go to the questions. The first question, Jesse, is what is the difference between job read and job discover?
Yes, I think we can I make sure that my screen is being shared again.
Yep, hold on.
Just a moment. Yep. Share. Okay, can people see my screen again?
Yes.
Okay. I think we covered this during the talk, but just in case people missed it. So the read permission is a permission to see the job, so that means you can actually view the job's page, you can see its status. By default, it means that you can download job artifacts, although that can actually be separated out into a separate permission if you want to. All of those different kinds of things. And for folders, it means you can look at the folder and so on. Discover is very limited. It's implied by read. So if you're granting read, then it doesn't matter. But if you're not granting read, then discover just means that someone can tell that the job is there. So they can go to the URL and be given the information that such a job exists, but that they cannot read it. If they're not even granted discover, then Jenkins just pretends that no such job even exists. It'll just treat it like a typo, which is a bit more secure, but also a bit less friendly.
Okay, so the next question, Jesse, is what is the best way to use permission with folders?
So I think we covered that pretty thoroughly during the main talk. So this was probably asked earlier on. So all of the different local groups that we defined in folders granted permissions to folders and the jobs within them.
Okay, you see the next question, what is the, is there any difference between this demo Jenkins Enterprise and the Jenkins Enterprise on cloudbees.com?
So I'm not sure if that's referring to the hosted Jenkins or not. So what I've been demonstrating is Jenkins Enterprise. Here I have the most recent available release, 150911. That was just announced very recently. And if you go to a host on cloudbees.com, we also offer what we call Debit Cloud, which is hosted Jenkins service. So for example, this is one such Jenkins instance that's used to build components of Jenkins itself. And this is also using the very same RBAC plugin. So if you are using hosted Jenkins, then you have all of the same abilities here. Depending on which version of the RBAC plugin you have, you might have they'd have to log in for that. But you might have a somewhat older version, so if you want all of the most up-to-date UI features, you might want to upgrade. But it's essentially the same. And by the way, that can also be used to make your Jenkins instance public. So it's by default, hosted Jenkins instances are closed off to public access, so only people who have a cloudbees.com account would be able to see them. There's a special configuration option for a hosted Jenkins that says, yes, I know what I'm doing, allow anonymous users to read Jenkins to look at it. And in that case, you can go and use the RBAC plugin to fine-tune the configuration. So you can do all of the things we talked about, make certain folders public while others are private, and so on. Okay.
Next question is, can you talk a little bit about command line and permissions?
Right, so this is talking about the Jenkins CLI. It's a quite powerful feature in Jenkins whereby you can connect to the server via command line shell and run various operations on it, which is very useful for scripting. And all of the authentication for command line works very much the same as for similar operations via the web UI, or for that matter, via the REST API. So there's also a, if you go to click on REST API, you can see information about using HTTP to obtain information and take actions on Jenkins. So for the REST API, the authorization is identical. The authentication is just based on the HTTP session, which means that you can use API tokens. It are the way to log in remotely from a script if you want to use the REST API with particular permissions. For the CLI, there's a somewhat different method of authentication. You can either use a login command to log in as a particular user using a password or API token. Or more commonly, you would set up SSH public keys for a given user. So if you, for example, if I click on Alice and click the configure link, under SSH public keys, I can upload Alice's public key for a secure shell. So this is pretty familiar to Unix users, somewhat less so for Windows users. What this means is that after you've done that, if you have the right SSH private key locally on your machine, then you can use CLI commands and you'll just be automatically authenticated. So if you run a CLI command and you're authenticated as a particular user, then the exact same kinds of permissions are checked during that command, and that will go through RBAC as usual. So if you, if you try to run a command such as delete job, then that's going to go to that job and it's going to check whether you have the job delete permission on that according to your RBAC configuration.
Okay. Next question. Was your presentation just applicable for enterprise version, or some features can be found on vanilla version of Jenkins also?
So most of the presentation dealt with the role-based access control plugin, and that is part of Jenkins Enterprise. So to go back to the very start of the demo, when we turned on global security and we enabled role-based matrix authorization strategy, then this is part of the CloudBees RBAC plugin, which is available only with the Jenkins Enterprise subscription. If you're using only open source Jenkins, then you'll have built-in options like project-based matrix authorization strategy, which sort of give you a few of the same capabilities, but it's a subset. So you don't have abilities like filtering or applying permissions to a folder and so on. And there are some other open source authorization strategy plugins that you can download if you find that those meet your needs as well.
Okay, so we can take one last question. Are there any best practices in using the RBAC plugin?
Any best practices?
Yes. For instance, limited roles at global level and then more permissions at the folder level.
Yes. And so I've mostly been trying to show that kind of style, although in this demo I have granted authenticated users at least the the overall read and job read permissions. So in this demo I've sort of been operating under the assumption that by default all logged in users are going to be able to at least look around in Jenkins and see stuff. And we saw how to turn that off specifically for particular folders like NextGen when we made it secret. But you may have different kind of policy that would be more appropriate for your organization. So you might want to turn off all permissions for authenticated by default and have everything be granted upon request only. The only tricky bit there will be that in order to, even if you grant permissions for people to job read a particular folder, they're still going to need to have overall read permission on Jenkins itself so that they can even get to that folder. So basically Jenkins will check permissions step by step. So for example, if it was checking, at least for displaying things in the web UI, that's going to be true. So if you're trying to browse into this base folder, you're going to have overall read permissions on Jenkins, and then read permissions on NextGen, and read permissions on base as well. So you have to provide at least some minimum level of permissions for anyone that you expect to be working in Jenkins. But yes, it's a good idea to try to keep those permissions to a minimum. Unless you have particular sub-projects like our Playpen example that you feel comfortable just giving a set of people free-ranging permission to play in. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Jesse. So I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everybody who has joined us on behalf of Jesse and myself. We hope you have a great day, and we'll send out the recording later at the end of this week. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone, for attending.